This book is available for pre-order from Games Workshop today, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on it because if you're anything like me, you probably want to know how the Lion came back and what he's been doing and what the impact on the wider Imperium is going to be. So I was desperate to get my hands on this book. Thanks to Games Workshop for sending it through to me. I had a good look through it, and it doesn't tell you. So I thought I'd share my findings with you from this book so you now know what I know, because if you're anything like me, you'll be desperate to find out, and this is now what I know, which is it doesn't tell you. There's a bit at the beginning of the book which is the Lion training with some of the Risen in a battle barge of the Blood Angels. He's making his way to the Dark Angels who are assaulting Vashtor and Abaddon in the Somnus system at the far eastern side of the galaxy, and he's just there. And he's fighting with some of the Risen. Who are the Risen? Well, they're the fallen who have now risen. The Dark Angels, at the end of the Horus Heresy, how to explain it? Long story short, Lionel Johnson went back to Caliban, found out that some of them had turned traitor, turned to chaos, and there was a great big battle. And at the culmination of the battle, Caliban was broken, destroyed, and ripped into the warp. And all the people who sided with Luther on the planet of Caliban were spread across space and time, and they are called the Fallen. And the Unforgiven are all the Space Marine Dark Angel chapters. Is a one big name for all of the Dark Angels put together, because the Dark Angels are split up into different successor chapters, but all of them are called the Unforgiven, and they hunt them and track them down and kill them, bad guys. That's what we've been told for the last 10,000 years. But here we have Lionel Johnson training on a deck with a number of fallen Dark Angels who originally sided with Luther, but the Lion has forgiven them, and in his own eyes, he's seen into the depths of their soul and seen that these particular ones that he's fighting with don't have an ounce of chaos on them at all and are still incredibly loyal. He's forgiven them. They're risen up one more time. So we do know from some of the leaks coming through that the Fallen, well, there were hundreds of thousands of them. There were plenty of them on the planet, but some have turned to chaos. Some haven't turned to chaos. Some now fight with the Lion. Some are hanging on the deck of this battle barge. And the Lion's back. And it hints that he's been back for some time, slaying monsters. Indeed, one of the Arks of Omen, which was found by Dante and the Blood Angels earlier in the Arks of Omen book series, they found it dead, abandoned, everything inside slaughtered, and just the whole of the Ark of Omen was just covered with rotting plant matter. And Dante's been on the trail of whatever caused this ever since, and he's hooked up with the Lion, found the Lion, and found out the Lion was responsible for killing everything on this Ark of Omen. And it's his forest walk ability, his ability to step out from the forests of Caliban across time and space and appear, well, maybe not time, but appear where he needs to appear. Indeed, he does it later on in this Ark of Omen book. So the Lion Reborn, the Primarch now in the 41st millennium, Lionel Johnson, has the ability to teleport where he needs to be. And it's called Forest Walk. And Caliban doesn't have that, but the Lion has that. How he got it, where he got it from, whether it's ability he always had, we don't know. To find out really what's happened to the Lion, where he's been doing, what he's been doing, and what the impact might be on the wider Imperium, we're going to have to wait for the Lion's book. There's a Black Library novel coming out, which is going to explain everything, or explain as much as Games Workshop want to give away to us, because this book doesn't do it. It's a pity, really, because during the Gathering Storm books, which was a trilogy that Games Workshop launched at the end of 7th edition, before the reset of 8th edition, during that book series, Guilliman returned. And in that trilogy book series, before the launch of 8th edition, the Gathering Storm books did tell you exactly what happened to Guilliman, exactly how he was risen, and exactly what he did upon immediately waking up in the 41st millennium. His motivations, his feelings. Indeed, after fighting the Plague War against Mortarion and the Death Guard on Macragge and the 500 Worlds, he immediately set off back to Terra to meet good old Dad and have a conversation with him in the throne room. Lionel Johnson, well, this book series, we don't know whether he's already done that or not. Maybe he has. Maybe he's only been around for a couple of months or weeks. Maybe he's been around for decades. Maybe, in fact, he's been around for a very long time. And hopefully the book by Black Library will help reveal some of the things. But yeah, just a gap, a difference in approach here from Games Workshop. There was a reset at 8th and a Primarch came back and they told you why and how. There's a reset in 10th and a Primarch's come back and they haven't told you why and how in the Arcs of Omen book series. He's just back with the Blood Angels. What this book series is, what book 5 of The Lion is the culmination of the Arcs of Omen storyline. So the Arcs of Omen are massive space hulks that Vashtor has retrofitted. Beforehand, space hulks, 100 kilometers long, 500 kilometers long, massive ships, or massive hulks tumbling in space, which are a mishmash of many, many ships that have just melded together in real space and in the warp over thousands and thousands of years. Some of them with tech that predates the golden age of technology. Some of them with tech that predates the rise of the Emperor of Mankind and the Horus Heresy. Some of them with tech that goes back perhaps millions of years. These vast things tumbling through space. Well, Vashtor's got a hold of a bunch of these things and has cleansed them and is setting out across the galaxy to find the pieces of the key. And that's the Arcs of Omen storyline. The key is something which will unlock a weapon which will change the fate of the galaxy. That's all we know. And throughout the Arcs of the Omen storyline, he's been attacking Farsight and unleashing Angron. And indeed, on the previous book to this one, he attacked the Rock to get something off the Rock, which is the remaining hunk of Caliban after Caliban was blown apart and ripped through time, and the Fallen were ripped through time and space, and the remainder of Caliban was sucked into the warp. Only the Rock remained, Aldoruk, the original monastery fortress of the Dark Angels. And in the 41st millennium, the Rock is now one massive floating, well, it's like an asteroid, but a weaponized 40k version of an asteroid. You can imagine it is very big as the phalanx of the Imperial Fist, as big as an Arc of Omen, in fact, but with many, many layers of void shields, many, many offensive and defensive guns, transport bays, loading bays, armories, canteens, libraries, McDonald's, Starbucks, things like that. It's got everything on it. It's a small floating planet, and it's the home of the Dark Angels. And Vashtor attacks it and is repulsed in the previous book. In this one, he attacks it again. The Dark Angels are lured, well, go after Vashtor at the Somnus system to unleash hell upon them, and they're essentially lured there. And this book deals with the conflict that happens there. When they get to the Somnus system, they found something incredible. They find Caliban reborn as a demon planet. Vashtor has refashioned all the bits and pieces and all the continents and all the stuff of Caliban and stuck it back together, and now is a piston world, a cog world, an engine world with tectonic plates moving around and demon energies billowing off of it. But nevertheless, all of the Dark Angels, and also when the Lion turns up a bit later, but all of the Dark Angels can immediately recognize it as a facsimile of Caliban. And so the Dark Angels turn up, and there's a big war. There's a massive battle goes on the surface of Caliban. There are also other major battles in space in the Somnus system. And next to the Somnus system, the Dark Angels don't just go in there blindly. They have the Raven Wing out scouting, and they find a secondary fleet that Abaddon has put in a nearby star system that was ready to come in and cut them off from behind. And the Dark Angels send off a number of successor chapters to deal with that fleet and manage to not get themselves slaughtered. I like the fact that they just don't walk in blindly, that Chapter Master, Supreme Chapter Master Azrael does make some very clever tactical decisions. And it's not just the Dark Angels, it's the Dark Angels and many, many, many of the successor chapters that owe fealty to the Dark Angels. It says something in the region of 75% of all the successor chapters of the Dark Angels. Basically, they attack at legion strength, 100,000 or so of them. Numbers that have not been seen since the Horus Heresy, or at least until the Badab War, perhaps, or the War of the Beast. But massive numbers of Space Marines descend upon this world to stop Vashdor. They can see the clock is ticking down. It's all a ruse, of course, so Vashdor can infiltrate the rock and talk to T'Chulka there, which is a old T'Chulka. How to explain him? He turns up in the Horus Heresy. It's a thinking machine, a demonic machine, and maybe not demon, maybe not AI, maybe something completely weird and something completely different that can bend space and time. And in the Horus Heresy, allows the Dark Angels and Lionel Johnson to move from one part of the galaxy to another part of the galaxy. Allows them to skip through warp space in a way that other ships couldn't during the time of the Horus Heresy because of the Ruin Storm, because of the massive disturbances in the warp at the time of the Horus Heresy. Vashdor wants T'Chulka and gets T'Chulka. It turns out that you find out that T'Chulka is part of the Old One's technology back from the First War in Heaven, from 70 million, 80 million years ago, the war between the Necrons and the Catan and the Old Ones that split apart time and space. He's a relic from an ancient age. And T'Chulka says, look, I need you to do this for me. And they have a chat. And T'Chulka agrees. So Vashdor has a chat with him, and T'Chulka agrees and jumps across. So, long story short, massive battle on the planet of Caliban, a big distraction, so Vashdor could get what he wanted from the previous book, which is T'Chulka, and he does. He gets that, and then he leaves. He has the last bit of the key, and he leaves. And that's essentially what happens in this book. In the meat and potatoes of it. In the middle of all of this, of course, Lionel Johnson turns up with the Blood Angels while the Dark Angels are on the back foot fighting on the surface of Caliban Reborn. And he appears with all of the Blood Angels. Dante and the Sanguinary Guard turn up with 1,000 or so Blood Angels, and they fall upon the demon world and all the hordes that are fighting there upon wings of fire. And Azrael at first is like, oh no, I didn't really want anyone else to turn up because this is secret Dark Angel stuff. We don't like anyone finding out about why we call ourselves the Unforgiven. We don't like anyone finding out about the Fallen and the idea that some of the Dark Angels strayed from the path during the time of the heresy. He's a bit reticent about the whole thing. And then Dante tells him, I got the Lion here with me. And Azrael and the Dark Angels are like, what? And then the Lion turns up and starts kicking ass and doing Primarch stuff, which is basically kicking ass. So the Dark Angels renew their effort, massive great fight, and then Angron turns up. And so Lionel Johnson and Angron go toe-to-toe. Now, in any school of thought ever, Angron beats everyone. Angron is your trap card. He beats everyone in close combat. If there is anything in the galaxy that could actually be Angron, Demon Primarch, in close combat, I wouldn't want to meet it down a dark alley. But Lionel Johnson goes toe-to-toe with Angron after he's already taken a bit of a pasting. Well, Angron hasn't taken a bit of a pasting. Angron has taken many blows, many attacks. He's a bit poorly by the time Lionel Johnson gets to him, because Angron has already delivered 1,000 skulls for the Skull Throne and spilt much blood for the Blood God. And the battle between the Lion and Angron doesn't go very well for the Lion either. The Lion spends most of the time backing up and trying to lure Angron into a trap. And he uses his own rage against him to eventually outsmart Angron a little bit. So the churning machine cog-like planet is actually the last thing to deal Angron a blow as one big piston falls down from the sky and crushes the demon Primarch. The Lionel Johnson barely escapes with his life intact, and while all this is going on, Vashdor gets Tucholka, gets the last part of the key for the machine that he needs to find the great big weapon. And then the planet starts powering up, and the Lion and the Blood Angels and all the Dark Angels get up and go, leave, evac. Essentially, this book ends with Chaos winning, which is a nice change. Lionel Johnson comes up to stop Angron and to stop Vashdor and Abaddon completing their nefarious plan, and he doesn't. And Azrael doesn't either, and neither does Dante. Abaddon and Vashdor's plan succeeds. And the book ends with all the guys leaving. So Caliban, what is it? Now all the pieces of the lock have been put together, the key have been put together. Caliban, this machine that Vashdor has refashioned, is an ancient tunneling machine that was once used by the old ones to cut the webway. One of many ancient tunneling machines that was used by the old ones to cut the webway. So you have real space, then you have unreal space, the warp, and in between them, in extant space, in gap space, spaces between space, you have the webway. This machine that he has disappears at the end of the book by burrowing its way through space-time and burrowing a new hole between the galaxies, a place where chaos can't touch it and a place where real space can't touch it. It's strongly said, not even hinted at, they say that Vashdor says that with this machine he'll be able to cut holes through time and space here, there and everywhere and tear the galaxy apart if he wanted to. But he now he has the key, this tunneling machine, this thing that cuts new webways. It doesn't cut into the webway, but it literally cuts new holes through space and time in between the warp and real space. With this tunneling machine, it's the key to find the lock. He can find the lock that will unlock the weapon that will change the fate of the galaxy. And they don't tell you what that weapon is either. Either there's going to be another Ark of Omen book coming out, and I doubt it, or they're going to reveal it in the book 10, in the core rule book for the 10th edition, and I doubt they're going to do that either. I think what's happening is they've set something up for an ongoing narrative. Just as the Great Rift and the return of Guilliman, the Great Rift ripped the galaxy in half, Guilliman came back, and now you have Imperium Nihilus and Imperium Sanctus. You have the Imperium in the north, the bad Imperium. You have the Imperium in the south, which can be still see the light of the Astronomicon, and it isn't as bad as the Imperium. You've set up a stage between the forces of light and darkness. In the north is Baal and the Blood Angels and many, many Space Marine chapters, but they're cut off from the light of the Astronomicon. And over there, the forces of chaos aren't just doing well, they're also empire building. In a number of the Arks of Omen's book, they mention that the Emperor's children have set up vast empires and that Perturabo is very active in the galactic north as well, setting up whole sectors and systems and turning them to his will. They're putting the pieces on the chessboard and setting up the narrative that is going to be the beating heart of Warhammer 40k going forward, which is in the grim darkness of the far future, chaos is in the ascendancy again. This is the end times. And the Primarchs are coming back. Guilliman is back. The Lion is back. And I predict all of them will be coming back. All of the bad guy Primarchs, all of the good guy Primarchs will be making a return over the next number of years, 10 years, 15 years. They'll all be coming back bit by bit by bit as Games Workshop drill down into the end time lore. And at the same time, you've got the fourth Tyranid expansion ripping through from Imperium, from the Sanctum Pacificus, from the Galactic West. You've got the return of the Necrons waking up all over the place, and you've got other great threats appearing throughout the galaxy in this time. It is the end times. It is the last big war to end all wars, and that's why all the Primarchs will be returning, and that's why Vashtor needs this key to find this lock to reveal this weapon which will change the fate of the galaxy. And this lock and this weapon clearly isn't in our galaxy, and it isn't in the warp either. It's in the spaces in between. And there's a book by Dan Abnett called Pariah. He did the Eisenhorn trilogy, he did the Ravener trilogy, and then there's the Ravener versus Eisenhorn trilogy, and there's a book by Dan Abnett, which deals, at the very end of the second book anyway, Pariah, deals with the spaces in between the galaxies and talks about a figure called the Yellow King. We're going to spaces that we've never been to before in Warhammer 40k. The Horus Heresy is coming to an end, and the Black Library writers will be focusing on the narrative that Games Workshop wants to build now. Games Workshop has seen that the Horus Heresy is so successful. It gets to the New York Times top 10 bestseller list. It's so successful. It's launched an entire model range. In plastic, it's launched an entire game system. A decade or so ago, or 15 or so years ago, before the Horus Heresy book series was a thing, we had Warhammer Fantasy and we had Warhammer 40k. That's all we had. But the Horus Heresy is so successful, now we've got Warhammer AOS and Warhammer 40k and Horus Heresy. And in the future, we're going to have 2 fantasy systems. We're going to have Warhammer AOS and Warhammer Fantasy Old World. And we're going to have 2 sci-fi systems, Warhammer Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40k. One of the things that's convinced them to do this is the great success of the Horus Heresy book series. New York Times bestsellers, whole model range. And now that's coming to an end. The focus of the authors, the focus of Games Workshop is about how to unlock that secret source, how to unlock all the goodness that they've injected into the world 10,000 years ago, how to use some of that material, that narrative, and bring it back to life in the 41st millennium. This end of times, this end of days war. So that's the sense that you get coming away from the book. One of disappointment for not finding out about the lion, which would have been nice to know. Where is he? What's he doing? Why has he been hanging out with the Blood Angels? And how is he going to interact with Guilliman? Is he going to do anything with Guilliman? Because at the end of this book, he just goes rampaging off with the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels to try and track down Vashtor and the Arks of Omen. He's off monster hunting, and as the Primarch that was born to kill monsters, he's in the perfect place to do it. I predict, going forward, that the Lion will not have much interaction with Guilliman, the Lord Regent of the Imperium. I think that there will be some interaction, but it's very likely just to tell Guilliman, well, you get on with doing what you're doing, I'll get on with doing what I'm doing. I'm going to find the monsters and destroy them and wipe them out. You keep, sticking post-it notes all over the place and making lists and things. You're very good at that sort of thing. I'm very good at killing monsters. And I think that's the limit to their interaction for the foreseeable future anyway. So it's disappointing because we don't get answers there and we don't get to see those interactions, but I suggest that that's the way they're going. But also I came away with a sense of depth, a sense of tragedy, a sense of chaos winning, a sense of things. If you think things are bad now, they're going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. That is a core tenet in Warhammer 40k. Things can always get worse. There is no bottom of the barrel. There is no tsunami, forest fire, or zombie invasion that can be worse than a Tyranid invasion or exterminators or something even worse. It's going to get worse. So the sense of depth and tragedy, they've dialed up past 11 to 12. And that is the culmination of the Arks of Omen storyline. To find out more, we're just going to have to keep reading the Black Library, find out what is in the 10th edition rulebook, and find out what the Black Library authors do next. So there you go. That's what I found out from the Arks of Omen story. I had to share it with you guys straight away because, as I said, if you're anything like me, you'll definitely want to know. Happy wargaming.